I believe I told you yesterday, I just want to reemphasize that when you enter the courtroom, the cameras are pointed to the ceiling, so you are never videotaped, and when you leave the courtroom, the same way. They're remotely controlled back there. They immediately go to the ceiling, so you're never on camera, okay? Rest assured. All right, Ms. Timmons, continue.
When we left off, you were in your car, talking with the defendant. On this particular day, when you're meeting with her, is it fair to say that you knew something wasn't right, but you didn't know at that time what actually had happened?
Well, just to clarify, any unattended death is a potential crime scene. We investigate all deaths until we rule out issues. This case, just the condition of the baby and the conflicting information we'd already gotten, we're trying to sort it out. We don't know that a crime's occurred or anything like that, but there are a lot of questions, and it seemed like we were getting more and more questions as the time went on. So, I didn't know that there was any kind of criminal act or anything like that, but certainly we were investigating an unattended death, which we always do. So
at the time that you were speaking with her, were you at that point just trying to get some basic information?
Yes. The questions I had asked her were, what was Sterling's health like? What medications was he taking and things like that. I was just trying to determine, how we got to where we were.
When you were speaking with Cheyenne, did she tell you anything about what the routine at home was? Did she work?
No, Cheyenne didn't work out of the house, and she explained that Zach had been working some extra hours. Zach drives truck, actually delivers chickens, and she explained how he worked the night shift and had worked some extra shifts in the preceding weeks.
Right, and you talked about that she said the last time she saw him was the night before, sometime before it got dark, correct?
Yes.
Did she explain what she did for the rest of that night and that following morning?
Yeah, she's talking about caring for Nala and feeding Nala and trying to keep Nala up a little bit later, so she had been on a normal sleeping pattern. She said she was doing dishes, a number of household type chores and just around the apartment.
Did she discuss what time Zach had gotten home?
I don't remember if the exact time was given. Through investigation, we kind of determined when he arrived home.
And that was approximately when?
4:30.
In the morning?
Yes. That would have been on the 30th.
Did Cheyenne say that she was up when Zach got home?
They got up and ate together. Nala and Cheyenne and Zach.
So when Zach came home, they all sat down together to eat?
It sounds like that was what occurred.
Is that what she had told you during
Yes.
that conversation?
Yep.
Did she tell you what they ate?
I believe it was grilled cheese sandwiches, if I'm not mistaken.
All right, so they, as a family, the three of them, were eating grilled cheese sandwiches, and then what?
They went to bed.
And during that time frame, she had not checked on Sterling?
Correct.
Did she explain to you how she found Sterling in the condition that he was?
She said that she'd woken up with Nala and that she thought to herself that she hadn't checked on him in a bit. And
did she say what time she had woken up?
Again, I don't remember the exact time given, but it sounded like around 11:30.
Late morning.
Late morning, yes.
Proceed.
So she'd gone in and checked on him and determined that he had died and went back and woke Zach up.
And what did she tell Zach? Did she say?
That he had passed, that he had died.
Now, you saw that Sterling was found dead in a baby swing.
Correct.
Did you ask her about that swing?
Well, I asked, did she pick him up? How did she, I was a little bit confused as if it was You would think that in determining whether your child had passed away, you would get a close look or at least uncover or take the baby out of the swing, and that she said she did not pick him up.
So when she found Sterling dead in the morning, she said that she didn't touch him or move him.
Correct.
Did she talk at all about whether that was a normal place for Sterling to sleep?
She said that her mother had a swing like that and that they had used that previously, and that it soothed him because it rocked. It was a powered swing, and when we found it, it was actually, the light was on. The swing wasn't swinging, but it was plugged in and the light was actually on. And that's where apparently she said that Sterling slept in that, and then Nala slept in a crib next to the bed that she shared with Zach in the other bedroom.
We've seen pictures of the apartment, and there was a baby or a toddler playpen in what's been called the master bedroom. Is that the place where she described Nala sleeping?
Yes, that's where she described Nala as sleeping.
Right, and during this conversation you asked her about normal feedings for Sterling?
Yes.
And when she told you that he ate 4 ounces every feeding, did it seem anything out of the ordinary? Did it seem like, Sterling was fed all the time?
Well, having told me that she fed him a total of 8 ounces of formula the night before, and just given my observations of the child, there was some, at least, I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but it seemed somewhat inconsistent with what I was seeing.
But Cheyenne's statements to you were that she fed Sterling.
Yes.
Did you ask her if she ever took Sterling to the doctor for baby checkups?
I did. Actually, in asking about Sterling's health, I asked if he was on any medications, had he gone full term. Actually, in the apartment still, I'd asked a couple of those questions, and she said that Sterling had shown up early, unexpectedly, and was born in a bathtub at home. He was born at 39 weeks. She said he showed up a week early, so I would assume that would have meant that he was born in about 39 weeks. She said her pregnancy was confusing for her in that she thought, because she has some irregular bathroom habits, that she just had to go to the bathroom. And she said she pushed and his head popped out unexpectedly. She didn't really recognize the labor as labor. She thought it was that she just needed to use the bathroom. So she said they went to the Cresco Hospital after Sterling was born. They were both hospitalized. They had actually been transferred to Mason City, and they were both hospitalized for a period of time because she hemorrhaged and because he had some breathing issues.
Do you know how long they stayed in the hospital? Did she tell you that?
It sounded like about a week.
And upon release, did you ask her if there was any health problems with Sterling?
She said that he had had a rash, but that it had gotten better. I asked about baby visits or subsequent follow-up visits, after a hospitalization. She said that they had appointments, but that she did not get to the appointments. She hadn't had Sterling back to the doctor at all since he came home from the hospital.
Did she tell you that he had been healthy since he came home, though?
Yes, with the exception of that rash.
And did she describe where that rash was?
I didn't get into the details of that, I don't believe.
Did you have any discussions with the defendant about whether whether the defendant was on any medications?
I also asked Cheyenne if she was on any medications. Actually, right at the very end of we were walking back into the apartment after talking, I just asked if she had been on any medications for anything, health-wise.
And what did she say?
She said she hadn't since just after Nala was born. She had been diagnosed with postpartum depression, and they had started her on something, but she never took it because it made her sick when she did.
And Nala was almost 2 years old at the time. Huh?
She was 20 months.
Right after you spoke with the defendant, did you go back into the apartment?
Actually, I went back and I met then briefly with Zach.
And did you speak with Zach as well?
I did, shortly. That conversation was cut short. I had asked to get hold of the DCI, and I received a call back. As I started to talk to Zach, I received a call back from John Turbot from the DCI.
Okay, tell us what DCI is.
I'm sorry. The Division of Criminal Investigation is a branch of the state Basically, it's a investigative service that's offered by the Department of Public Safety, and they provide investigators to assist agencies like mine that don't have a ton of resources and a bunch of investigators. So the DCI is an organization within the state of Iowa that we call on. Unfortunately for me, I've had the opportunity to call the DCI in several times where we've had homicides or really serious cases where it was just too much of a case for us to be able to pursue just from an hours and resources and training perspective. They're fantastic investigators and very good at what they do.
At what point did you decide to call the DCI?
Well, when I initially arrived on scene and we were talking, conferring, I spoke briefly with Jason Rossell. Just things weren't adding up, and I'd asked him to go ahead and contact the DCI, and then again, John called me back. John Turbett from the DCI called me back.
And he called you right when, or close in time to when you started your conversation with Zach Cohen, correct?
Correct.
So you spoke with John Turbett on the phone?
It actually gave me, I've worked with John for many years on different cases, and it actually gave me a chance to take a step back, because at that point I was just still trying to gather some information. I didn't really look at it as a criminal thing necessarily, but there seemed to be a lot of parts and pieces to it. So in talking with him, it kind of gave me a pause to think through where we were at within the beginnings of this investigation, and John and I basically came to the conclusion that, hey, let's hold up and just see if Zach and Cheyenne would come to the sheriff's office where we could sit down and talk away from the scene and try and get a much clearer picture, slow things down a little bit, and have a more involved conversation about what happened.
Did you ask the defendant and Zach Cohen to come to the sheriff's office?
I did. I asked if he and Cheyenne would be able to come to the sheriff's office. Zach's concern was he didn't have enough gas in the car to make it down there, so I gave him $10 to be able to put some gas in their car to come down.
Were any arrangements made for Nala before the defendant and Zach left the apartment building?
I mentioned before when I arrived on scene, the gal that directed me to the apartment, she knew the Cohen-Harris family and had actually babysat for Zach and Sterling previously. So they said that she'd be able to watch Nala. Zach and Cheyenne, I'm not sure which one asked me, but they asked that I go grab some diapers out of their bedroom, and a phone charger. Zach's phone was about dead. So I went back into the apartment, I grabbed some diapers for Nala and a phone charger, and then we dropped Nala off at the neighbor's house.
Okay, so before they left, they wanted to make sure Nala had some diapers before she went to the neighbor's.
Yep.
Okay, about what time did they leave the apartment complex?
It was probably before 2. I mean, my whole conversation with Cheyenne was around 20 minutes in the truck. So, I mean, I would guess by 2 they had left.
And what did you do after they left?
We had given some statement forms to a couple of the first responders. I collected those statement forms, met briefly with the sheriff, and then our medical examiner had arrived on scene, and I talked briefly with him.
Did you at some point make a phone call to the Department of Human Services?
Yeah, whenever there's a death of an infant or unexplained or unattended death of an infant, we would make a report to the Department of Human Services. In this case, I had some concerns too. There were a lot of unanswered questions, and we had this other toddler, infant, little person to be concerned with too. So I just kind of gave them a heads up. I had some concerns about what was going on in this household, and wasn't sure exactly where that was going to go.
All right, so you notified DHS. Then what did you do?
Just to clarify, DHS, the Department of Human Services, in case you haven't, if you're not familiar with that organization, by law, we've got to report certain stuff, and the death of an infant would be certainly one of those things. If you have a concern, they're kind of our resource as far as if you were looking at outside placements. Just to clarify that in case you didn't know. Sorry.
So after you contacted DHS, what did you do?
I drove back to the office, took those statement forms, talked to the sheriff briefly, made sure we had security set up on the apartment. You know, when we start an investigation like this, one of the things we do is we just kind of seal that off so that there's not people coming and going and things aren't changing in that environment. If you want to have an investigation, you have to have, you have to maintain what's going on there to be able to make sense of it later. So that was how we assigned things. I drove back to the office, and I had spoke with John Turbot and Special Agent Chris Calloway. Was coming up with him as well, and then I met them at the sheriff's office.
When you arrived back at the sheriff's office, was Zach and the defendant already there?
No, they hadn't arrived yet.
When they did arrive, what did you do with them?
Actually, we met outside on the sidewalk in front of the sheriff's office, and I introduced. Because it took them quite a while to get there. I introduced John and Chris to Zach and Cheyenne.
It took who quite a while?
Zach and Cheyenne.
How long did it take them to get to the sheriff's office?
I'm not entirely certain exactly when they arrived, but like I said, I had spent some time at the scene collecting those statements and talking to some people, and then I had driven back to the sheriff's office, and they had already left before that, and I drove back to the sheriff's office, met with John and Chris, talked about who would probably interview who and how we'd facilitate that, and we were just starting to think they weren't coming. I'd asked them to come. I'd given them money for gas, but that's no guarantee that they'd actually come down there. So.
And are you aware of what they were doing during that time?
No.
All right. So when they did show up at the sheriff's office, what happened?
We had talked in advance before they arrived about John possibly interviewing Zach and Chris interviewing Cheyenne, and so introduced John and Zach. And they went up to we have an interview room in the sheriff's office. It's upstairs. It's not in the locked part of the building at all. And that interview took place upstairs. The defendant was interviewed by Chris Calloway, and we only have one. We're a small agency. At the time there was only 9 of us, including the sheriff. So we didn't have another interview room. So Chris actually sat with her in his car out in the street in front of the sheriff's office and spoke with her there.
All right, and what were you assigned to do?
Well, shortly after that, Special Agent Jim Teal arrived, and we talked about the case and what was going on while those interviews were occurring, and decisions were made to make applications for search warrants for the residents, both Zach and Cheyenne's person and the car that they were driving, just to gather information.
Were the search warrants just for their person and car, or did you also obtain one for their home as well?
We obtained search warrants for Zach and Cheyenne, the apartment, and the vehicle that they were driving. There were subsequent search warrants additionally for the phones and other things.
Once those warrants were put together, were they approved by a judge?
Yes, they were.
After the warrants were approved, what did you do?
Well, the interviews were still going on, and I wanted to stay there till that was all concluded, because we had the search warrants for their persons. We took their clothing and phones that they had with them. Agent Thiel actually went back to the residence, and they started to search the residence on that. I was also waiting for the interviews to be done, and we had the warrants, so I went ahead and hand searched their car that was there in the parking lot.
What kind of car did they have?
It was Cheyenne, registered to Cheyenne. It was a purple-ish Buick Century.
Did you find anything in the car?
It's a purplish Buick Century 4-door. It had a toddler large car seat in the back, and it had kind of armrests. It was forward-facing, kind of what you would expect Nala or even a bigger kid to be in.
It wouldn't be a car seat that an infant could be in.
No, absolutely not.
Okay. What else did you find in the car?
There were 2 tires behind the driver's seat on the back, in the back seat behind the driver's seat, like wedged between the door and the seat, and then one of them was actually resting kind of on the armrest of the child safety seat. A bunch of trash, like adult traveling trash, soda bottles, chip bags, Pringles bag, or not Pringles, but there was chips bags and Gatorade and other empty pop bottles. There's a doll in there.
Like a toy doll?
Yeah, like
Was there any room in that car to put an infant seat?
not as it was.
Did you find any infant-type items in the car?
No.
Who did you speak with after searching the car?
Well, I spoke again with John Turbot and Chris Calloway. I also had a matron come in to assist us in getting Cheyenne changed. I sent one of my staff up to pick up clothing for Zach and Cheyenne so they'd have something to wear. And then I had one of our matron staff, one of our female jail staff, assist in getting Cheyenne changed so we could seize the clothing that they were wearing.
Did you also speak with DHS, Department of Human Services again?
I did at that point, and after the subsequent interviews, we made the decision to do an emergency law enforcement removal of Nala. We really hadn't figured out what was going on there, and we have deep concerns for her safety, so I advised the Department of Human Services that I was going to do an emergency removal and asked that they get foster or temporary care lined up for the other child.
And did Nala go to temporary foster care?
Yeah, when I went back to the apartment in Alta Vista, I was met there by that worker that was picking Nala up at that time.
Did you assist her then in removing Nala?
Yes.
Do you know about what time that was?
And after 8, it got to be a longish day, but probably around 8 o'clock.
All right, so you're back at the apartments at this point, correct?
Correct.
What did you do when you arrived back there and after helping remove Nala?
Well, one of the things we do when we have an unattended death or any kind of suspicious death is we want to figure out who last interacted with the victim, and when was that. So I knew that Jennifer Shriver had provided child care for both Sterling and Nala previously, so I interviewed her. I wanted to know what she knew about that and took her written statement.
Did you also assist with the search of the apartment?
Not really. Jim Thiel was kind of taking care of that, as was Deputy Rossell. My real purpose there was to try and figure out how best to get Sterling's body to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. We had already called and gotten an appointment for 8 a.m. the next morning for autopsy to be done. So most of my job there became trying to figure out how best to give them the clearest picture of what we were looking at.
Now, let's talk about that a little bit. What do you mean about what's the best way to get his body out?
Generally speaking, in an adult unattended death, you can't send the whole bed, or you can't send, or you could, but they don't have that much space. But in this case, we wanted to give the medical examiner's office the best chance at being able to observe the evidence in the way that we saw it. So what we elected to do was we actually took the powered swing apart and we left Sterling's body covered and as it was in that swing assembly, and we placed the entire assembly into the body bag and positioned it, and then I carried it from there out into the transporter's van. We sealed it with an evidentiary tag and positioned it in there. I talked to the transporter about how important it was to keep the package oriented the way it was. And then I also took the apparatus that the swing attached to. I seized that as part of the search warrant, put that in my truck, and I brought that with me to the autopsy the next morning.
All right, did you observe the body bag being sealed?
I did.
And when you put Sterling in the body bag, still in the car seat, you left him in the condition as you found him, correct?
Yes, exactly. We didn't even remove clothing or anything like that. He was obviously deceased. There was no. Oftentimes, for a medical examiner investigator, they do more of an assessment, but in this case, it was so obviously that he'd been deceased for some time. It wasn't. We felt it was more important to get him down as in the best state possible for evidence. And it's a swing. It's not a car seat. It's a powered swing.
Who transported Sterling then?
The transporter was a funeral director from New Hampton.
And then you took the rest of the swing in your car.
I did.
When did you go to Ankeny at the medical examiner's office?
I left that residence a little after 10:30, and then I was in Ankeny at 8 a.m. the next morning. I was actually there about 7:30.
All right, let's talk about the autopsy a little bit. This is August 31st, 2017, correct?
Yes.
Is that standard for law enforcement to be present at an autopsy in a suspicious death?
We do that on a regular basis if foul play is suspected, and oftentimes it's helpful for the medical examiner if we can provide them with that ongoing information stream to help them do their job. This is not the first infant death that I'd actually gone to the autopsy of.
So you arrive at the medical examiner's office in Ankeny. What happens then?
Well, we came in and we briefed with his staff. Dr. Klein was the medical examiner. Sterling's body had been placed on an examination table in the bag as we had positioned it. And as the bag was opened, I could see that nothing had moved. It looked exactly as it did when we put him in the bag.
What happened next?
We staffed, I don't know what you would call it, but basically they asked me a ton of questions about what I had learned about the death and the timelines that we were able to come up with. And they kept coming back to questions about how long had the child been deceased. When I arrived at the lab, there wasn't a ton of odor because he was still in the bag, but as soon as the bag was open, that odor was there again.
Was a decision made to set up the swing before the autopsy started?
After I explained why we brought down the powered swing and that I had the apparatus with me, they were excited that I could bring that in and set it up for them. So we did that. What we had done was we had taken a bolt out that kind of held the top of the swing to the apparatus, and so it was pretty easy to put it back together and just slide that bolt in so they could see the angles and the attitude of the chair and everything as it was.
After the medical examiner being able to observe Sterling in the swing as he was, then what happened?
So then the actual autopsy part started, and they systematically went down through the swing and removed the articles that were there with Sterling and evaluated each piece as we went.
Now, what are you doing during this process? Are you just observing, or are you participating?
I'm observing and asking questions, probably more than they would have liked, but I had a lot of questions.
How many layers were on Sterling?
I'm not sure.
Tell us what you saw when they started taking the blankets and clothes.
So there was
off of him.
Sterling was wearing his shirt was like a onesie that I described with the staining on the front of it, and then that was tucked into some shorts, they didn't come all the way down his legs. They're like shorts, kind of like Bermudas or whatever. And so first they took off that. There was a quilt laid over the top of him. Have they seen any pictures yet? Okay. There was a quilt laid over the top of him. And then once we took that off, that was completely saturated, and it was like stained with this brown, what looked to most likely be a combination of urine and feces. Then there was a sleeveless hooded sweatshirt that was kind of wrapped in there, and then a shirt, and then several pairs of socks, and then some of those little finger thingies like to keep a baby from scratching himself. I'm not even sure how many actual articles of clothing, but we laid all of it out on a table, and we dug down to where it was just him in the swing.
So all of these layers were sitting on top of him?
On top and then tucked in and around him, kind of.
Were they all soaked?
Yeah, everything was that putrid, gray-brown slurry of. It was really the odor as we took the quilt off and dug down through that was. I think in my report I called it acrid or acidic, or I don't know. It wasn't like normal decomposition. Like, I've been around a lot of dead bodies, and 30-ish years I've been doing this. It wasn't like that. It was a different kind of the combination of urine and feces and like it was really strong. I can't convey in words how bad that was.
When these layers were taken off of Sterling and clothing was started to be taken off of him, was anything out of the ordinary noticed?
Well, and I think one of the reasons that there were a lot of questions to ask is that I'm a fisherman, and one of the things I use, I fish for panfish, and I use waxworms, and I observed what looked to be like tiny little waxworms or larvae, maggots, in the clothing around Sterling. And as we took the clothing off on Sterling's skin, and in that slurry there were these bugs. The little black bugs weren't flying around so much, and I'm not sure if that was from having been in the bag. I mean, there wasn't much flying around, but you had the larvae and stuff, both in the clothing and on Sterling, in different colors. There's like really light colored ones, and there were some darker colored ones that were further away in the clothing.
That you saw maggots?
Yes.
Did Sterling have a diaper on?
Yes.
What did that look like?
So, in the process of going through this, it was pretty systematic. They kind of went down through and what was in the seed, and the seed was completely saturated, and then the combination of urine and feces had like been strained out through the diaper. So then, when they took the diaper off, the skin underneath the diaper was extremely compressed, and a lot of the skin was like loose and sloughing off, where it was mixed with the feces and the stuff. So it was hard to tell the margins of where the skin stopped and the diaper started, and the sludge into the clothing. It was all just kind of it was a mess. It looked like that diaper had not been changed in a very long time.
Once all of his clothing was removed, what did you notice about Sterling's body?
I was shocked. I mean, I mentioned before when I saw him in the apartment how tiny, like his arms and his legs and his feet and his neck looked. But when the clothing came off, everything under the clothing was far worse. You could see every rib. He had no butt to speak of. It was pretty much flat. And where the pants and the diaper were, it compressed down to, it just didn't look like there was any weight or anything left to him. Now, I'm not a doctor and I can't really assess that stuff, but
that was your observation.
It was so small. He was 4 months old and it's just tiny.
After autopsy, did you continue to do any follow-up work?
Yeah, I actually stayed through the entire autopsy, the rest of it, and I asked a lot of questions, and we did collect. I participated with Dr. Klein in collecting some of those bugs as specimens. We continued the investigation, talked to everyone in the apartment complex, talked to everyone in every house around the apartment complex, spoke with Zach's employer and others that were friends with both Zach and Cheyenne. We continue to investigate elements of this case through this whole process.
Did you do anything with the defendant's phone?
Yes, we seized. There was actually 3 phones that were seized: the defendant, Zach's, and another phone from the residence, and then some other devices as well.
I want to talk specifically about the defendant's phone. What did you do with it?
We used a process. We work with the Waterloo Police Department. It has specialized equipment to be able to extract data from cell phones and other devices. And we brought the phone down to have an extraction done, basically where they hook it up to it's called a Celebrite machine. You may have heard of that in the news, but it's a machine that can take the information off the phone and give it to us in a format that we can review without actually changing the evidence.
Right. Generally, well, and at some point then that all gets put into a report for you, correct?
Correct.
And you've looked at that?
I have.
Throughout the month of August of 2017, Did the defendant have communications with her mother, Brandy Harris?
Yes.
And how were you seeing those communications?
A combination of text messages, and then in texting sometimes you can send pictures and such like that.
Were you able to look at text conversations between the defendant and Zach Cohen during
Yes.
the month of August?
Yes.
What was the feel of those text messages and the feel of their relationship at that time?
It seemed like they had something of a running dialogue most of the time when Zach was at work. Oftentimes, Cheyenne would be complaining about him not being home, or not coming home to his family. But kind of normal stuff.
And there were many text messages where you see the defendant telling Zach she loved him and things like that.
Yes.
Did you also see on the defendant's phone that she played games on her phone
Yes.
during the month of August?
Yes. Even the night of the 30th, it would appear.
The night of the 30th, she was playing games on her phone?
Well, the 29th into the 30th, yeah.
Excuse me, the night
Yes.
of the 29th. What kind of games was she playing?
I don't remember the actual names. I'd have to look at the report, but I like Bejeweled or Bubble Pop thing. I'm sorry, I don't recall the actual.
Candy Crush, things like that?
I don't think Candy Crush was one, but yes, games like that.
All right, so for all purposes, your review of her phone, you really didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Is that fair to say?
No, I really didn't see anything either way. I mean, it was. I think the last search histories that she had was for a restaurant in Wisconsin called Hanson's Hold Up, and her web search histories. And
Did you also have to look into a town celebration called Wapsie Days?
yes.
First of all, what is Wapsie Days?
Well, every little town in Iowa has a days of some sort, whether it's corn days or cow days or whatever. Well, Wapsie Days is Riceville is on the Wapsie River, Wapsipinicon River, and it was that year was the 4th, 5th, and 6th of August was their city celebration.
So August 4th, 5th, and 6th of 2017 was Wapsie Days?
Yes,
And that's held in Riceville?
correct.
Why were you looking into when that was?
Well, as I mentioned before, we're always trying to figure out who saw the victim last, and who, we try and piece together everything we can about, how do we get to where we are. So we're always looking for who cared for the child and things like that. And the best we could figure out was that Brandy Harris, which is Cheyenne's mom, would have cared for Sterling and Nala over the course of Wapsie Days. We really didn't identify anybody else that had contact with Sterling after that.
But it's fair to say that the defendant's mother, through your investigation, is the last person that can say they saw Sterling healthy.
Correct.
And that would have been the weekend of August 4th, 5th,
4th, 5th, 6th. Correct.
of 2017. Sharon, can we take a quick break before I go into my next set of questioning?
Yes.
It should be just a couple of minutes that we need to talk to you.
Do we need to remove the jury, or do you want to just talk in sidebar?
I think we could just go back and see if we
We'll need the defendant present, though. Okay. Marilee, you will need to stay here with the jury while we're back there, okay? All right. Feel free to stand, stretch. This shouldn't take us too long. This courtroom is designed somewhat strange, and then they actually have to leave and to go back here. So this will just take us a few minutes. Barb, we will need you. Will. All right. Proceed.
Sterling was found dead on August 30th, 2017. You continued your investigation, correct?
Correct.
Was there a point in time when the defendant was arrested for the death of Sterling?
Yes, October 25th.
Why did it take so long?
Well, there was a lot of people to talk to and a lot of investigation to do. But what it ended up coming down to was we had to wait for the medical examiner's final autopsy report. They would not, at the time of the autopsy, and I mentioned it, I might have been a bit annoying to the medical examiner. I kept asking, what caused this baby's death? And they won't answer that at that time. There was chromosomal studies and all kinds of tissue samples and toxicology and all those things have to go out and be analyzed, and then the reports have to be written, and it takes months for that information to come back. It's not like on TV.
Once you received the autopsy report, though, the decision was made
Absolutely.
to arrest Cheyenne Harris, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Who else was arrested that day?
Zach Cohen.
And he was arrested also for murder in first degree and child endangerment resulting in death.
Yes, he was.
Since that time, have you remained on the case and assisting where needed?
Yes, I have.
All right, I'd like to go back to discussing Alta Vista. We've heard that there's maybe 300-400 people that live there, is that right?
Probably closer to 3-ish.
Small town.
Yeah, very small community.
You've seen State's Exhibit 37, which is a map of part of Alta Vista.
I have.
And the map includes the apartment complex that we've been discussing, correct?
Yes, it does.
At this time, I would ask to enter State's Exhibit 37.
Any objection? You said 37?
Permission to publish.
37 is admitted and granted.
I am going to hand you this. Deputy Palo, when you talk, if you can make sure that someone holding the cards. Tell us what we are looking at in Exhibit 37.
Is there a pointer?
There is
It's the little green.
the green button.
The green. Oh, okay. So this is the east edge of the city of Alta Vista.
And that would be the right side of the photograph.
Correct. And this is the main east-west street in Alta Vista. It's Weber Street.
And that's the top of the photograph.
This street here. And then this would be the apartment complex.
And that's depicted on the photograph with a blue line around the complex, correct?
Correct.
Which apartment building was Sterling in?
Sterling is in this building, and again, there were 4 apartments in each of these buildings. There's a hallway that runs down the middle of each building, and then 2 apartments, one in the front and one in the back. This is the south apartment. Apartment number 7 would have been this apartment unit right here.
So you were pointing at the center apartment out of the 3. It was the middle, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then the particular apartment, number 7, is in the top right-hand corner
Yes.
of that building.
Correct.
Is there a gas station in Alta Vista?
Yes, it's called the AV Express.
What kind of things do they have in there?
It's a convenience store. They've got pop, candy, cigarettes. I think they have beer, diapers, peanut butter. Most importantly, they have coffee.
But they do have diapers there?
Yes.
How far away is that gas station from that apartment complex?
It's approximately a block off screen here. If you follow this grade up towards Weber, here, it's going to be just west of that on the north side of the road.
So you're pointing to the top of the photograph and off to the left.
It would be about here, I'm guessing.
So it's a 2-3 block walk.
And from what I understand, it's where Cheyenne met Jennifer Shriver. She was working there. Shriver was working there at the time.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, officer.
afternoon.
When Ms. Harris and Zach came down to the station for the interview, who was driving?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you know how those tires got in the back seat of that car?
I know that they had some tire problems and that Jordan Clark had assisted them with some tire repairs, but no, I don't know how the tires came to be in the back of the car.
Or really when, correct?
Correct.
You spoke for roughly 20 minutes with Ms. Harris?
In my truck, we were out.
Truck?
Yeah, we were out there for about 20 minutes.
I know that, let's say that we can divide this into two parts. You sort of had your initial discussion with her at the apartment, but in order to have a more in-depth conversation with her, you needed to take her out to the truck so that you would be uninterrupted. Fair enough?
Yeah, we if you watch my attempts at trying to talk to her with people walking in and out, it wasn't working.
It's something we could watch because you had a body cam on, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And was that body cam on when you were talking to her in your truck?
It was.
And so there would be a full recording of that 20 minutes.
Correct.
Okay. And that recording of that 20 minutes with Ms. Harris would show that she was crying.
Yes.
And that she was upset.
Yes.
She was able to answer your questions, but throughout that interview she was crying and upset. Fair?
Yes.
And is it also fair to say that she was soft-spoken?
I had no problem hearing her.
Okay.
I guess I really hadn't. I felt that her response volume was appropriate. I think on the video, it may be because of the distance from my camera. I think she may be softer spoken, but I don't think that was an issue for me at all.
Okay. Obviously, the best evidence of that would be the recording, right?
Well, again, my body camera and her on the other side of the truck. I mean, yeah, obviously my voice is going to be louder because I'm very close to that camera, and her voice is going to be quieter. And I find that in all of my recordings, just about. So.
Zach said he needed $10 for gas. Is that right?
Well, I don't know that he said a dollar amount, but he said he didn't have enough gas to get to town.
That's fair. You gave him the $10. He said he was worried about getting to town. So presumably on the way down to the station, they would have stopped for gas, right?
I actually learned later that they did go to the AV Express to put in some gas, and
Okay. Now, and Ms. Harris explained to you that she had at least been prescribed some medication before for depression. Is that right?
she referenced postpartum depression after Nala was born.
Was any work on your part in the investigation of that done to verify that with the hospital or doctor?
I know that we had looked for medical records. That was not something that I had done.
In the course of your investigation, between Ms. Harris and Mr. Cohn was the breadwinner. He was the one bringing home the money, right?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Harris didn't have a job.
Correct.
Okay. So when it came to, let's say, a Hy-Vee receipt, that money presumably would have had to come from Zach. Fair enough?
There were also text messages, though, between her mother and her that would indicate that the mother was also assisting. So I'm not sure. I mean, the assumption would be that within the household, he was the one that was bringing home the money, but there was also other help.
Yeah, I want to talk about those text messages with her mother. Sterling was found deceased on the 30th of August. And what day of the week was that?
Wednesday.
Wednesday. Were there text messages between Miss Harris and her mother arranging for her mother to watch the children, Sterling and Nala, that weekend?
Yes.
The weekend coming up after Wednesday the 30th?
Correct.
And were those text messages, did they indicate clothing that Cheyenne's mother had bought for not just Nala but also Sterling?
Yes.
And so, and those text messages were happening, do you remember what day that was?
There's a ton of them. I don't recall the exact dates. I know it was just in the few days prior to that incident.
And I'm having trouble remembering the exact date, but it was that same week.
Yeah, it was within a week of yes.
Okay. And so at that time, and that close in time to the 30th, Ms. Harris was making arrangements for her mother to watch both of her children.
Correct.
You said that one of the most important things that you want to attempt to identify when you have a death is try to determine the last people that would have seen the individual alive. Fair?
Yes.
Okay. And you had a receipt from August 26th from a Hy-Vee, right?
Correct.
Part of the investigation. And I'm assuming as part of your experience in law enforcement, you're aware that those institutions oftentimes have video cameras.
Yes.
For security and anti-theft measures. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. Was any attempt made in this investigation to secure the video from the Hy-Vee in Charles City?
Not by me.
Okay. That may well have shown not just the people that, if Sterling was there, that were with Sterling, but other individuals that could have identified whether he was alive at that time. Fair enough?
Yes.
But in part of your investigation, no effort was made to obtain the video, correct?
Correct.
And it's important in an investigation like this that when you find that information, so for example, that would have only been a few days later when you from the 26th to the 30th, to act quickly to secure the video.
Correct.
Because it doesn't exist forever, correct?
Correct.
Oftentimes, those institutions, businesses, whatever, will overwrite based upon their own policies about how long they keep things, 30, 60, 90 days, that sort of thing. So you want to get a preservation order, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But to your knowledge, none of those steps were taken to see who was at that Hy-Vee on the 26th of August.
Yes. Unfortunately, in the process of the search, I wasn't aware of that receipt early on in the investigation.
If you had been aware, obviously that would have been a step you would have taken.
Probably, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect.
Oh, excuse me, no.
You may step down.
Thank you.
Ms. Timmons, do you see any reason to start with 10 minutes of Agent Thiel, or I'll leave it up to you.
Judge, whatever you or the board would like to do. I mean, I think it probably the easiest just to start with Agent Thiel.
I liked your last answer, no. So let's recess for the day. I think we've been through enough for one day. So we will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. The weather's supposed to be better. So we all made it today, and with better weather, it should be easier tomorrow. So we will see you at 9 a.m. Please continue to heed the admonitions. Stay away from local news channels. Stay away from national news channels. Stay off the internet. Google, things like that. Things might pop up. So we'll see you in the morning. All rise for the jury.